In the old photos, it is not the lines on people's faces that hit you first. It is the tables. A kitchen table with a thin cloth. A plate that looks too big for what is on it. A coffee cup that is full of more hope than coffee. During the Great Depression, hunger was not just a feeling. It was a daily plan. It was the quiet math of how far a sack of potatoes could stretch. It was the sound of a pot lid lifting, not to reveal a feast, but to prove there was still something warm for the family. And what many people forget is this. The era did not only produce hardship. It also produced a kind of rough creativity. Meals built from scraps, from gardens, from foraged greens, from cans with dented labels. Some of these dishes have almost vanished. Others are still hiding in plain sight, served today without their story. So tonight, let's step back into those kitchens. Not to romanticize them, but to remember them. 25 forgotten Great Depression meals. Simple, stubborn, and sometimes surprisingly comforting. The Great Depression began after the stock market crash of 1929, but the pain did not arrive all at once. It spread. Banks failed. Jobs vanished. Farms dried out in parts of the country. In many towns, a paycheck became a rare thing. If you had work, it might be part-time or paid in a way that barely covered rent. Food became the center of life because it had to. People grew what they could. They traded. They stood in bread lines. They made soup from bones and stretched it with water. Women saved every crust. Children learned not to waste. A good meal was not about variety. It was about enough. And that is what makes these meals so powerful. They're not fancy. They are proof. Proof that families kept going one pot at a time. The first meal is one of the most famous and one of the most misunderstood. Hoover stew was not a single official recipe. It was a survival stew, named bitterly after President Herbert Hoover, as hard times deepened. In many versions, it was made with cheap canned vegetables, macaroni, and sliced hot dogs, or any small bit of meat. It mattered because it could feed a crowd in one pot. You could scoop it into a bowl, and it looked like a real dinner. In some homes, it simmered on a stove all afternoon, stretching hope with every ladle. From that big pot, it was a short step to the quiet workhorse of the era. Potato soup. This was the soup that showed up when the pantry looked empty, but a sack of potatoes was still tucked in the corner. A simple version often used potatoes, water or milk if you had it, salt, pepper, and maybe a bit of onion. If there was bacon grease, a spoonful could change the whole bowl. People ate it because potatoes were filling, cheap, and familiar. One small detail you hear in family stories is the way the steam fogged the window over the sink, while someone stirred and waited for the kitchen to feel warm again. And when the potatoes ran low, many families leaned on what they could buy for just a few cents at a general store. Tomato soup and crackers. It could be homemade from canned tomatoes, or made from a can of soup if you were lucky enough to have one. Crackers turned it into a meal, not just a cup. They softened in the heat and made the bowl feel heavier. It mattered because it was quick, and it fed children without a fight. There's something deeply nostalgic about the sound of crackers breaking between small fingers, then disappearing into red broth like it was the most normal thing in the world. But what came next was even more comforting and often remembered as Sunday food, even when it was made on a Wednesday. Vegetable soup with dumplings. The soup itself could be whatever the garden and the pantry allowed. Carrots, onions, cabbage, potatoes, dried beans, even a handful of corn. Then came the dumplings, little clouds made from flour and water, maybe a bit of baking powder, maybe not. People ate it because the dumplings turned thin soup into something that felt like a proper meal. The human detail is always the same. Someone lifting the lid, careful not to let the steam escape too fast, checking to see if those dumplings had finally puffed. From there, we move into a flavor that defined hard times for a lot of families. Ham hocks and beans. Ham hocks were not glamorous. They were tough, bony, and cheap, but they carried smoke and salt, and a long simmer could coax out something close to luxury. Dried beans were affordable and stored well, which mattered when you did not know what next week would bring. Many families remembered this meal as a pot that lasted more than one day. The first night was soup and beans. The next day, it thickened. The day after that, it became filling enough to quiet a house. If ham hocks were not available, the pantry still had another bean dish that sat right in the middle of the era. Pork and beans. Sometimes it was homemade with navy beans and a small piece of pork. Often it came from a can, sweetened with a little molasses or tomato, depending on the brand and the household. People ate it because it was dependable. You could open it, heat it, and feed everyone fast. A small detail that lingers is how it tasted best eaten from a tin plate, with a piece of bread used like a spoon when forks were missing or worn out. And once you start talking about beans, you cannot avoid one of the most widespread pairings in American survival cooking. Rice and beans. It sounds plain, but it was a complete kind of food with energy and protein in one bowl. In some homes, it was seasoned with onion, salt, a bit of lard, or whatever spices were tucked away. In others, it was almost bare, relying on hunger to make it taste good. People ate it because it was cheap and it lasted. One of the most real details is how a pot of rice and beans could sit on the stove, and anyone who passed through the kitchen could take a small scoop, like a quiet promise that the house still had something. Of course, in many parts of the country, Rice was not the daily starch. Corn was. That brings us to beans and cornbread. Beans gave protein. Cornbread gave weight, warmth, and that steady sweetness of cornmeal. A common variation was beans cooked with onion and salt, and cornbread baked if there was an oven, or cooked in a skillet if there was not. It mattered because it used pantry staples, and it turned them into a meal that felt complete. The nostalgic detail is the crumble. Cornbread crumbs scattered on a table, brushed into a hand, then eaten anyway because nothing was thrown away. And one of the most surprising things about that cornbread story is how many families made a version without an oven at all. Hot water cornbread. This was a rough, practical bread. Cornmeal mixed with hot water, a pinch of salt, and sometimes a bit of fat if you had it. Then it was cooked in a way that fit the kitchen, often in a skillet. People ate it because it was fast, cheap, and filling. It mattered because it turned cornmeal into something hot you could hold. The human detail is the way it was eaten. Not carefully, not politely. It was broken open and used to chase the last bit of beans around a bowl. From cornmeal, we step into something that sounds strange until you remember the era's rules. Bread and gravy. It was not fancy gravy. It might be made from pan drippings, flour, water, and salt, maybe milk if you had it. Then it was poured over bread, often day-old bread, because nothing was wasted. People ate it because it made a small amount of fat feel like a meal. It mattered because it could turn plain bread into comfort. The detail that sticks is how it looked. A pale river of gravy soaking in a bread, steaming, making the whole kitchen smell like something richer than it really was. And if bread and gravy was the supper that held a family together, milk toast was often the quiet meal of mornings and sick days. Toasted bread, butter if there was any, then warm milk poured over it, sometimes with a little sugar, sometimes just salt. It was soft and easy to eat. People ate it because it was gentle, and it stretched milk when there was not much. In many homes, it mattered for children and for older relatives who needed something mild. The nostalgic detail is the bowl itself. A simple bowl, held close because the warmth mattered as much as the food. Milk toast leads naturally into a dish that sat on the edge between breakfast and plain survival. Cornmeal mush. This was cornmeal cooked into a thick porridge, served hot with a bit of milk, syrup, or sugar if you had it. If you did not, it was still food. People ate it because cornmeal was cheap and stored well. It mattered because it filled stomachs when money did not. Many families remembered the texture first. Smooth, heavy, and steady. The small human detail is the way kids watched the pot, waiting for the first spoonful, because the day could not really start until something landed in their bellies. And then there was the clever part of cornmeal mush, the part that turned leftovers into something new. Fried mush. The mush was cooled until it held together, then cut into slices and fried, often in a little fat saved from other meals. It could be eaten sweet with sugar or savory with salt and pepper. People ate it because it was yesterday's breakfast becoming today's supper. It mattered because waste was a luxury no one could afford. The nostalgic detail is the sound. The faint sizzle in a skillet, and the smell that made even a small kitchen feel busy and alive. Another breakfast that carried the era on its back was oatmeal. Simple, plain, and steady. Oats could be bought in bulk and cooked with water or milk with a pinch of salt. If you had a little brown sugar, it felt like a treat. If you had nothing, it was still warm. People ate it because it was cheap and it stretched. It mattered because it kept children going through long school mornings. The human detail is how it was served. Often the same bowls every day with the same spoon, rinsed clean and set back out like a daily ritual. But breakfast was only one battle. Lunch had its own quiet inventions, especially the kind that could be carried. One that sounds almost too simple to be real is the onion sandwich. In its plainest form, it was thick slices of onion between bread, sometimes with mustard, sometimes with a smear of mayonnaise if there was any. People ate it because it was something. Onions were cheap, and it had a bold taste that made plain bread feel less empty. It mattered because it was portable. The nostalgic detail is the smell. An onion sandwich in a paper wrap could fill a room, and it told everyone, without a word, what kind of year it was. When onions felt too sharp, another spread stepped in, one that still feels familiar today. Peanut butter sandwiches. Peanut butter was affordable, high in calories, and it kept well. In many homes, it was paired with jelly when there was a little extra, but often it was just peanut butter on bread. People ate it because it was quick and filling, and because it gave children something with real staying power. It mattered because it was one of the few cheap proteins that did not need cooking. The human detail is the lunch pail. A metal pail opened at noon, revealing a peanut butter sandwich that was a small anchor in an uncertain day. And then, just when you think the story is only about what people bought, you remember what they gathered. Dandelion salad. Dandelions grew everywhere. In yards, in fields, by fences. Families foraged the greens, washed them carefully, and dressed them with whatever they had. Some used vinegar and oil. Others used bacon drippings, turning a handful of weeds into something hearty. People ate it because it was free and it brought vitamins when produce was scarce. It mattered because it connected people to the land in a direct way. The nostalgic detail is the stained fingers. Green from picking, earthy from washing, proof of work before the meal even began. From foraged greens, we moved back into the pot. Boiled cabbage and potatoes. This dish was as plain as it sounds, and that was the point. Cabbage was cheap and lasted a long time. Potatoes filled the gaps. Some homes added a bit of salt pork or a smoked bone for flavor. Many did not. People ate it because it was reliable and because it could feed a family with very little money. It mattered because it was steady fuel. The human detail is the smell that filled a house. Sharp, cabbage-heavy, the kind of smell that clings to curtains and memory. Potatoes kept showing up for a reason, and one of the most loved ways to use them was potato pancakes. These were often made from grated potatoes, sometimes mixed with a bit of flour or egg if you had it, then fried until crisp at the edges. They were a way to make a small amount of potato feel special. People ate them because they were filling and because frying created that golden crust that felt like a reward. It mattered because it turned a staple into something worth looking forward to. The nostalgic detail is the first bite, hot and crisp, eaten too soon because waiting was hard. And if you had potatoes and a can of meat, you had one of the era's most practical dinners. Corned beef hash, often made with chopped potatoes and canned corned beef, sometimes with onion, if there was one. It was salty, hearty, and it used what was available. People ate it because canned meat could be stored and a little could flavor a whole pan. It mattered because it felt like a real meat meal, even when meat was rare. The human detail is the pan itself, scraped clean at the end, because the brown bits were the best part. But what many people forget is that the Great Depression kitchen was a master of second chances. That is where the leftover casserole comes in. It was not one dish, but an idea. Bits of vegetables, a spoon of beans, a little meat, if there was any, mixed together and baked or cooked until held. Some topped it with crumbs or mashed potatoes or whatever could make it feel finished. People ate it because leftovers could not be wasted. It mattered because it taught families to be flexible. The nostalgic detail is the mystery. No two casseroles were the same, and everyone at the table quietly recognized whatever they had seen earlier in the week. From the casserole idea, we move into a dish that many people think of as modern comfort food, but it has older roots in American kitchens. Macaroni and cheese. In Depression kitchens, it might be macaroni with a simple cheese sauce or macaroni mixed with grated cheese and milk, baked if there was an oven. In leaner homes, it could be more macaroni than cheese, with cheese used like seasoning. People ate it because pasta was cheap and filling. It mattered because it felt indulgent, even when it was not. The nostalgic detail is the way it stretched. A small pan could feed several people if each serving was modest and quiet. Now we turn to a meal that carried a different kind of meaning, one that asked people to face the realities of what was available. Liver and onions. Liver was cheap because it was not everyone's favorite, but it was nutritious, and it came from animals that were already being used for other cuts. Onions added sweetness and a strong smell that covered any bitterness. People ate it because it was affordable protein and because families did what they had to do. It mattered because it kept bodies going. The human detail is the divided opinions at the table. Some people loved it. Some people swallowed fast, but everyone understood why it was there. After a meal like that, many families leaned back into sweeter comfort when they could. Fried apples and biscuits. Apples could be stored, and even when they were not perfect, they could be cooked down in a skillet with a little sugar if you had it, or simply softened and browned. Biscuits could be plain, made from flour and fat, and sometimes baked, sometimes cooked in a way that fit the kitchen. People ate it because it felt like a treat without needing much. It mattered because small sweetness helped morale. The nostalgic detail is the scent of warm apples, the kind that made a hard day feel softer. And then, to close the circle of thrift, we come to a dessert that is really a lesson in not wasting a single slice. Bread pudding. Stale bread was not thrown away. It was saved, torn into pieces, and turned into something new with milk, eggs if you had them, and a bit of sugar or spice if it was available. Many families remembered it as a special night, even though it was made from leftovers. People ate it because it made use of what would otherwise be lost. It mattered because it proved that old could become good. The human detail is the way it was served. Warm, spoon out carefully like a gift. We have traveled through a lot of kitchens, but there are still a few meals that deserve their place in memory because they show the full range of how people survived. Back near the start of the day, there was always the question of what to do when you had bread, but not much else. Bread and gravy was one answer. Another was something even simpler that showed up in many households. Potato soup, again, could change depending on what you had. Some families added a little flour to thicken it. Some added celery if it grew nearby. Some used only water and salt. And still, it did its job. It warmed hands. It calmed the room. It was a reminder that food did not have to be fancy to be real. In the same way, pork and beans and rice and beans were not just meals. They were strategies. They were ways of thinking. Cook a pot big enough that nobody had to ask for seconds out loud. Keep something on the stove that could be stretched. Use the cheapest calories wisely. Feed the children first, and make the adults pretend they are not hungry. Even a simple onion sandwich carried that strategy. Strong flavor for a low price. Something to put in a lunch pail. Something to chew slowly so it lasted. And when peanut butter entered the picture, it was like a small miracle of modern food. A jar that could sit on a shelf. A spread that felt rich when everything else felt thin. But if there is one lesson that runs through every one of these meals, it is that people found ways to make food mean more than food. They turned eating into a kind of steady ceremony. A potsimmaring, a skillet warming, a bowl placed in front of a child. It was never just about taste. It was about comfort. It was about keeping the family together for one more day. When you look back at the Great Depression, it is easy to focus on the big numbers and the big events. The bank closures, the unemployment lines, the dust storms. But history also lives in the small details. A dandelion leaf washed in a basin. A slice of fried mush eaten standing at the counter. A bowl of oatmeal that made school possible. A pan of corned beef hash that used the last of the potatoes. A pudding made from bread that would have been thrown away in a different time. These meals were not glamorous. They were not meant to be photographed. Most of them were eaten quickly, then forgotten as the next problem arrived. But they mattered. They kept people alive. They carried families through winters, through layoffs, through bad harvests, through the quiet fear of not knowing what tomorrow would hold. And maybe that is why they still tug at us now. Because even if we did not live through that era, we recognize the feelings inside it. The urge to make something out of nothing. The pride of putting a meal on the table anyway. The way a smell from a pot can pull you into a memory you never personally had, like a borrowed story passed down through generations. So the next time you see a bowl of beans, or a slice of cornbread, or a pot of soup that seems too simple to mention, remember this. In another time, that simplicity was not a trend. It was resilience. It was families doing the best they could with what they had. It was survival, served warm. And the most haunting part is also the most beautiful. Those meals were not just about getting through the day. They were about holding on to a sense of home, even when the world outside the kitchen door felt like it was falling apart. Because in the end, the Great Depression was not only a story of loss, it was a story of endurance. And in the quiet steam rising from a battered pot, you can still see it. A country learning, meal by meal, how to keep going.